ACEP has kindly offered Oxfam the opportunity to share the unique new research we're launching today on petroleum cost auditing, which we'll have a chance to discuss just after a brief presentation. The study is entitled Examining the Crude Details, Government Audits of Oil and Gas Project Costs to Maximize Revenue Collection. And I trust everyone's received a copy of the executive summary, but I just want to let everyone know that we also have all of the documents related to the study, so the full report and 3 country case studies available online as of today, and we'll share a link with you as well so that you can take a look. Before we kick off with that, I'll just say a word or two about Oxfam and why we're doing this study, because I think it's important context. Oxfam advocates for just government policies and corporate practices in the oil, gas, and mining sectors, and supports the right of citizens and communities to participate meaningfully in decisions about the development of natural resources. Where there's a decision to extract, we seek to maximize the positive benefits of extractive industries and minimize the risks of negative impacts. In this light, we see oil revenues as a unique tool that, if maximized and well managed, can contribute to reductions in poverty and in inequality. I lead Oxfam's global policy work on taxation of extractive industries, which includes analysis and advocacy on fiscal policy, tax administration, and corporate tax practice. Of the 3, tax administration has generally been an area of more limited focus for civil society, but it's not for lack of importance. The best fiscal policies can have 0 impact if governments aren't able to collect revenues. And at the same time, the less scrupulous of companies will take advantage of governments that have trouble with tax administration, as they see it as an opportunity to avoid tax. Within the realm of tax administration, Oxfam and its partners' past work, particularly on economic analyses, including in Kenya and in Malawi and elsewhere, has highlighted that cost auditing is a particular challenge and a particular area where there may be risks to government revenues if it's not well implemented. This new study seeks to better understand this issue and particularly challenges around cost auditing. I'm going to leave it to Alexandra Reedhead, the lead author of this new study, to share highlights from this new research on cost auditing and particularly on the challenges. Alexandra is an international expert on tax with particular experience in the area of transfer pricing by multinational extractives companies in developing countries. And some of you may know her work already from her past work on transfer pricing here in Ghana. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to her, but I thank you for the time and attention you've devoted to this issue. Thanks.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for having us here. As Daniel said, this is the international launch of this report here in Accra. What a better place. Could you think of a better place to launch this report than here in Accra at such a beautiful spot by the beach? So we're thrilled to be able to share this with you today, and we look forward to your feedback during the panel discussion that follows. So hopefully you can see the slides on either side of the stage. If that's problematic, wave your hands and we can dim the lights. So as Daniel said, the report is called Examining the Crude Details, and it is a study that focuses on a narrow but important issue of government cost auditing in the oil and gas sector. So what is the report about? Well, as I said, it's about government auditing of oil and gas costs. The research was guided by two central questions. So the first question being, are governments making effective use of their audit rights concerning petroleum projects? So are they making use of their audit rights? And secondly, if not, what challenges impede the effective use of such rights and how might they be overcome? So the first question is, are governments actually auditing costs in the oil and gas sector? And if not, why? What are the challenges and how can we move forward? What are the recommendations to overcome those challenges to ensure that we're able to accurately verify the costs claimed by oil and gas companies? So briefly, our methodology. So the first part of the research was desk-based research. And we looked primarily at general guidance on tax and financial audit. So why general guidance? Because there is no standard for petroleum cost auditing specifically. There's also, as Daniel highlighted, a lack of literature on how to administer taxes in the oil and gas sector, right? So we had to look to general guidance on tax and financial audit in order to set out a framework for, broadly speaking, best practice that we could then use in our field research. But the lack of a standard on petroleum cost auditing and the lack of literature on tax administration really highlight or underscore the importance of this contribution in this study here today. So after the desk-based research, we moved on to field research here in Ghana, and we're immensely grateful to many people in this room who participated in the research here in Ghana. We also looked at Kenya and Peru for various reasons, in part because they are located in different parts of the world, also because they're at different stages of development of their oil and gas sector. The Minister for Kenya pointed out that, you know, Kenya is at a very early stage in its journey, Ghana is a bit of a way along, and Peru has been exploiting oil for much longer. However, we did encounter some challenges in this research. There is very limited transparency when it comes to audit activities and the results of audits. This means that it was very difficult for us to determine the effectiveness of cost audits from a quantitative perspective, okay? Because there is no information that is publicly available on how frequently audits are conducted and what the results are. Does the Ghana Revenue Authority collect revenue as a result of their audits? If so, how much? What did they initially anticipate collecting and why the reduction? So this information is not available. So it's very difficult to determine the effectiveness from a quantitative perspective. Nevertheless, despite these constraints, there is substantial evidence that countries could use their petroleum audit rights more effectively. Okay? So what we encountered in the research was a number of challenges that governments are facing that suggests that they're not using their audit rights as effectively as they might otherwise like to. And our concern is, how do we help governments overcome some of those challenges so that they're in a better position to audit costs? So these are some of the challenges that we're going to talk about here today. So moving on, what is petroleum cost auditing? What is it? Well, an audit is the process of verifying the accounts and records of taxpayers to determine the revenue due to government. So you submit your tax return to the Ghana Revenue Authority, and they're going to take a look at that. They're going to verify that the costs that you've claimed are eligible, and if not, they might audit you and investigate and ask for original receipts and so forth to substantiate your claim. So this is the process of audit, or fiscal audit. Now, what does audit mean in the oil and gas sector specifically? Well, it means different things depending on your fiscal regime. So we know that petroleum producing countries may employ different fiscal regimes, different ways to capture value from their resource. So on the one hand, they might use production sharing regime, where the government takes a physical share of the oil that's produced, right? So that's their main source of revenue. So in that instance, you're going to see cost recovery audits. So the purpose of a cost recovery audit is to monitor that the amount of oil that is claimed as cost oil, So the amount of oil that the company takes to recover its exploration and development and operating costs, to check that those costs are not overstated. Because if they are overstated, then that's going to reduce or dilute government's share of profit oil. Because at the end of the day, the company takes cost oil, what's left is then split between government and the company in the form of profit oil. Okay, so unless you have a cap on cost oil, there's a risk that that might erode government's share of production. So cost recovery audit. So this is very relevant in Kenya, that operates a production sharing regime, although it is transitioning to a kind of hybrid model, introducing corporate income tax in addition to production sharing. On the other hand, you have tax audit, which is what we have here in Ghana, because Ghana operates a tax and royalty regime for oil and gas, although Ghana is also a little bit in this hybrid area here because the government also takes a share of production in the form of the additional oil entitlement. So in addition to corporate income tax, a petroleum royalty, it also takes a share of production as the additional oil entitlement. So ultimately, the type of cost audit is going to depend on your fiscal regime. And it may be, as I said, that you have a hybrid regime that combines elements of production sharing and taxes and royalties, in which case that creates some special challenges, particularly around coordination, as you can imagine, in the sector, insofar as different institutions might be responsible for monitoring cost recovery versus collecting taxes. So that's broadly speaking what a cost audit is and how it varies depending on the regime. So why does this matter? Why are we here wasting your time this afternoon after lunch when you'd all prefer to be lying by the pool out there? Why does this matter? Why do we care about cost auditing? Well, we care for three reasons. The first one is that oil and gas projects are costly. So companies claim large costs, both in absolute terms, big sums of money, as well as relative to their gross petroleum revenues. So you can see up here on the screen that we looked at the capital and operating costs of all oil and gas projects combined in the three case study countries. So take all the oil and gas projects in Ghana, Kenya and Peru, and what we found was that the capital and operating costs were 43 to 49% of gross petroleum revenues. That means that for every $1 of revenue that a company generates, roughly 40 cents is spent on costs. So that means that any overstatement or exaggeration of those costs is going to have a significant impact on what is left for government to collect. So that's the first thing, is these projects are expensive. The second thing is the opportunities for tax avoidance. So features of the oil and gas industry combined with the international tax system mean that there are opportunities for companies to avoid tax. So the example on the screen here relates to transfer pricing. So we know that many oil and gas companies operating here in Ghana, for example, will sell a large amount of their production to related parties overseas, and similarly they will bring in a huge number of goods, services, finance from related parties elsewhere, usually, as you can see here, in a lower tax country. So they might overstate how much they're paying for goods and services provided by an affiliate in a low tax country, deliberately to reduce the income here in Ghana and to reduce the amount of tax that Mr. Saki over here at the GRA is able to collect, right? So we've got opportunities for tax avoidance here. And the third reason why we care about cost auditing is there are significant revenues at stake. So as I mentioned, one of the challenges we face is a lack of transparency around the audit results, right? So it's difficult for us to quantify the impact or the effectiveness of auditing, but the anecdotal evidence suggests that the revenues are significant. So you can see here some examples from different countries: Australia, my own country, in relation to Chevron, Uganda in relation to its oil sector generally. And I want to draw your attention to this $127 million from the Republic of Congo. Why? because the Republic of Congo in 2004 embarked on an experiment which was to carry out and publish independent audits of 9 oil and gas permits involving Eni and Total. So this was the figure that was assessed by the auditors in terms of the ineligible costs. So $127 million worth of ineligible costs. But why is this especially interesting? Because they publish the audits. And that's something I'll speak to shortly in terms of transparency and some recommendations for government. So the development partners in particular were important here in encouraging the government not only to contract independent auditors, but then to actually publish the results of those audits. So that's how we know this figure. Because the reality is, in this area, unless a case goes to court, it's unlikely that the public is going to know anything about it. So for you, you see EITI reports, you know how much money is going into government from the oil and gas sector, but it's not known what are the activities that are being undertaken to verify the costs and verify whether those payments are correct. So those are the 3 reasons why we care about cost auditing. So are governments auditing costs? Here's a very brief country snapshot of the 3 case studies that we looked at, Ghana, Kenya and Peru. And as we said, you know, due to the lack of information about audit activities and results, what's represented here in this table is not comprehensive. It's what we know based on the interviews that we conducted in the 3 countries. So you can see that it's limited in scope and there's some mixed results. Down you can see the audit results, so how much has been collected over the relevant period from audit. And again, as I said, these are not comprehensive figures necessarily. So what are the challenges to auditing costs? So what are the difficulties that governments experience when trying to verify whether the costs claimed by companies are correct? Well, during the course of our research across the 3 countries, we identified 6 recurring challenges. So the first one is the legal framework. So in some countries that we looked at across the 3, the laws that determine the treatment or the eligibility of costs in the oil and gas sector are inadequate, and changes might be difficult to apply. I think everyone here has been frustrated at one point or another with stabilisation clauses in investment agreements. So as a result of stabilisation clauses, in some cases, governments will make amendments, changes to their law in relation to the treatment of costs. However, they're unable to apply that to existing projects. The second one down here is about information. So it's one thing to open a taxpayer's file and look at the costs. It's another thing to know what you're looking at and whether or not that looks like an appropriate amount. So here, information around benchmarking costs is often difficult to obtain. So governments struggle to have the information to be able to determine whether the costs claimed by companies are too high or not. Then I'm going to over here to capacity. So often auditors are constrained in terms of their understanding or experience of the sector. The oil and gas industry is complex, it is constantly changing, it is inevitably difficult for government agencies to keep up with those changes so that they can spot the risks to the tax base and do their job. So a lack of sector expertise. I'm going to focus, however, on what I consider 3 of the most important of the 6 challenges, which relate to coordination, time frame, and accountability. So I'll say a little bit more about those. So the first challenge that we want to highlight here is that often audits are too late or too slow. So as you can see up here, you've got the value chain, exploration through to production, and you can see that oil companies start incurring costs from day 1. They start incurring costs from the time they begin to explore, and provided that those costs are eligible, they will then become recoverable and or tax deductible once the field enters production, which will affect government revenue. Okay? So costs start way back here. However, governments often wait to audit costs only when the revenues start to flow. So it's only when a field starts producing that government, often the tax authority, all of a sudden begins to audit these costs. However, what is outside the audit time limit or record-keeping requirements have expired? So what happens if you've left it until this point when production has started and you've then lost the right to audit the costs that have been incurred prior? Well, this is the challenge that Kenya has faced. So in Kenya, the period for cost recovery audit currently is 2 years. Tullow Oil, the main project in Kenya, started incurring costs in 2008. It's only in 2018 that the government is beginning its first cost recovery audit of Tullow Oil. That means that technically they're entitled to look at costs from 2016 and 2017, but not prior to that. Now, fortunately, Tullow has agreed to let the government go further back in time, but they may have agreed to let them audit those costs that are incurred earlier, but when the adjustments come from the government to those costs, then technically Tullow has the legal right to push back and say, well, actually, the period for audit has technically expired. So what has Ghana done to preempt this kind of issue? So Ghana has two features which mean it's less likely to have the same problem that Kenya faces. So firstly, as soon as a project discovery is declared commercial, companies have to submit their plan, their development and operations plan, to the Petroleum Commission for approval. So at that point, at that stage, the Commission gets to investigate costs and approve them. So that's a proactive way of controlling costs. Then in addition to that, the GRA has the right to approve companies' pre-production costs before they're capitalised. So just recently they've completed a pre-production audit of Sankofa field operated by Eni. And again, that means that you have the right to look back at these costs that were incurred before production starts. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is that cost audit rights are often fragmented. So what we mean here, you can see that this is any number of the actors that are involved in cost auditing. So you might have the tax authority looking at taxes, the ministry looking at taxes and potentially production. You've got a national oil company looking at taxes, production, and possibly participating as a joint venture partner. You've got the industry regulator and the supreme audit institutions. So, you know, how many cooks does it take to spoil the broth? I think what we can see here is that one of the challenges we face that's particularly acute to the extractive industries is this kind of, fragmentation of administration. It also means that information and expertise that might reside within each of these institutions often isn't shared well. If it was shared, that might alleviate some of the challenges highlighted earlier relating to capacity, so not having sector expertise and lacking information to benchmark costs. The national oil companies here, I think, are worth highlighting. The GNPC here in Ghana actively participates in joint venture audits. It has industry expertise and insights into the commercial operations, but there is no system for automatically sharing information by the GNPC to the GRA, for example. That's an area where, being mindful of potential conflict of interest, it would be worth exploring. Similarly, the role of supreme audit institutions. So in Kenya, the Auditor General there is adamant that they will also audit cost recovery because their mandate is public expenditure. Now, we're very much in favour of oversight institutions being active and fulfilling their responsibilities to monitor government agencies, but we need to be careful again that we're not duplicating efforts that are being undertaken by the tax authority and the ministry in that instance. So what are the coordination mechanisms? So again, a positive example from Ghana. You can see that in response to this fragmentation, Ghana set up the Multi-Agency Petroleum Revenue Committee, which comprises here. ASEP in particular has been very positive about that committee in strengthening oil revenue administration. But the concern is that ultimately this is a committee that is not mandated by Parliament. and it only has funding from DFID via GoGig until 2019. So that raises questions about the sustainability of these initiatives here, which are important in terms of trying to achieve coordination, and it's vital that we actually support these initiatives to carry forward. And there's sort of a question around down here about the GMPC. So GMPC is not part of this committee. Now again, we have to be mindful of its commercial functions as well, but it seems a bit of a shame to miss out on the information and the expertise that they have within that committee. So finally, the last challenge is, this challenge is around transparency and accountability of audits. So before I get into this, I want to give you a bit of context here. So the first point is that the challenges that I've mentioned previously, laws, capacity, timeliness of audits, coordination, these are all surmountable. These are challenges that can be resolved and addressed, and we can move on. However, governments need to tackle them with a mix of legal, policy, and administrative reforms. So the point is that none of these challenges are insurmountable. However, it does take political will, and it does take aligned incentives. So you can see here on the screen that here we've got a few of the challenges or measures that could be taken to try and address some of these challenges. So why aren't we investing more in capacity of our auditors to understand the industry? Why aren't we invoking the right to third-party audits that exist in the petroleum agreements here in Ghana, where we feel that we're unable to catch up with things in the sector? And why aren't we doing more to strengthen coordination? That's less of an issue here in Ghana, but certainly in Kenya and Peru. So the answer to that might be, well, we would posit that it is potentially a lack of political will and misaligned incentives. So examples of this here in terms of lack of political will, if we look to Peru, that was one of our case study countries, what we see there is a business-friendly ethos, right, where we have a government where there are serious concerns that it is captured by private interests. The former president was a lobbyist before becoming a member of the government. He was crucial in securing a lucrative gas license for an American company. In the final hours before his resignation, he signed 5 oil contracts for Tullow Oil. Right? So there are serious concerns there, and indeed outsiders say that the government of Peru has no interest in auditing companies. They say this is akin to communism. So, you know, there's certainly a question of political will in some environments, and in addition, this question of incentives. So on the one hand, we have an objective or an incentive to collect revenue. On the other hand, we may have incentives to promote investment into the sector and so forth. And sometimes those distinct objectives might be in conflict with one another. And in Kenya, indeed, the civil society there questions whether or not the political imperative of producing early oil as soon as possible has led government to deprioritise cost recovery audits. Why is it only now, you know, 10 years on, that we're beginning to look at this question? And as a result, potentially undermine revenue collection. And then finally, there may be examples of undue influence by companies and rent-seeking behaviour by public officials. Now, we didn't observe this in our research. One certainly can't rule out the possibility that is certainly a factor as to why some of these challenges haven't been addressed. The other issue that exacerbates the lack of political will or the misaligned incentives is just the absence of transparency around audit activities and results. So the first point here is that in many instances, the actors that are intended to monitor government performance of cost audits, so the supreme audit institutions, the legislature, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the understanding of the sector to really be able to do that effectively. And oftentimes their information powers are extremely limited. Here we have the Public Interest Accountability Committee, PIAC, which is an excellent institution, but I'm sure that they are the first to admit that they are constrained with the information that they have available to them to perform their analysis. The second issue is this lack of citizen accountability and public reporting. So the issue here is that audit reports are not published. Audit agencies provide very little information about their activities and the results of their activities. So when we talk about activities, that might mean that the audit agency reports on the frequency and the number of audits they conduct. And then on the results side, the adjustments that have been made and the revenue collected as a result. So none of this information is available in any of the 3 countries. And because we don't have this information, it's hard for audits to be accountable to citizens. We don't have the information to evaluate their effectiveness and whether governments are actually effectively using their right to audit. The last point around transparency. So we have contract disclosure. Ben mentioned that was the subject of the conference last year. We have made significant gains in contract disclosure. We have the EITI and revenue transparency. However, those initiatives are limited somewhat in that they don't get to the issue of whether revenues are being maximised. So we don't know that based on the information available from EITI and contract disclosure. So we need something new. We need an additional transparency measure in order to fill that gap. So in brief, in relation to 3 challenges that I've chosen to focus on, around the first one being coordination. So here, the recommendation is that governments need to define which agency is going to be responsible for cost auditing and to strengthen coordination. So in Ghana, here, that might be that we need to focus on achieving political support and budget to sustain the multi-agency Petroleum Revenue Committee. We may also want to strengthen coordination between the Petroleum Commission and the GRA, systems for exchange of information, possibilities of joint audits. With respect to time frame, it's critical that audit time limits and cost record-keeping requirements are long enough and that audits are carried out as soon as reasonably possible. So again, here in Ghana, audits need to be timely. We need to make sure that the GRA has the resources in order to undertake these audits quickly and to perhaps work in collaboration with external experts where that's not feasible in order to catch up and to build capacity. And finally, accountability. We need to move towards publishing audits. It's only right that citizens have information as to whether or not the costs claimed by companies are accurate, are appropriate, and indeed whether the revenues that government is collecting are sufficient. This information is vital in order for governments, for citizens to be confident that governments are actively monitoring oil and gas. And finally, in the report, on page 52, there's a checklist for things that for civil society, for monitoring government petroleum audits. So again, how do we make sure that civil society can be more engaged in monitoring government activity with respect to auditing oil and gas costs? Thank you very much. I hope this has been interesting. And I think now I'll hand back to Ben and we're going to have a panel discussion, and we certainly welcome any questions or comments that you might have during the course of that discussion.
Ladies and gentlemen, Alexandra, a round of applause for her. Bigger one. Fascinating report. I've always wondered how we're verifying the volumes that the various oil companies exploring for oil and producing oil on high seas are telling us, and this is a fascinating report. If you haven't seen it, it's somewhere on your table. It's examining the crude details. There are many more copies at the front if you want to grab a copy. Government audits of oil and gas project costs to maximize revenue collection. Thank you very much for giving us that insight. Yes? Okay, great. So there is there's a link to this. That's it. That's it right there. There's a link to this. That's the Oxfam /2B4XEK9. You can just follow that link and you can get a copy. So this is a soft copy for everybody else. Yes, so that is on your screens there. Please download a copy. So this is the full copy. What you have there is the executive summary. and really fascinating results there. Let's discuss what we've just heard. Let's discuss it. Let's bring in Dr. Ishmael Aka. He is a petroleum economist and head of local content unit, Energy Commission. Dr. Ishmael Aka, please join us. He will lead the conversation. Round of applause for him. Also joining that discussion is Mr. Benjamin Boakye, Executive Director of ASEP. He is joined by Mr. Samuel Sackey, who is the head of petroleum unit at the Ghana Revenue Authority. Mr. Sackey, if you are here, please join us. Thank you very much, Mr. Sackey. Also joining us is Mr. Kwesi Obeng. He is with Oxfam International West Africa. Mr. Obeng, if you are here, please join us. Fantastic. A round of applause for him. And Richard Amenuveve, if you're here, please join us as well. Richard is the Chief Revenue Officer, Large Taxpayers Office, GRA. Well, we have the GRA represented in that mess already. I'm very curious to know what they make of the findings. And so I'll hand over to Dr. Ishmael Aka. Please.
Okay, so good afternoon. Yeah, this afternoon we learned that Africa should be united. And fortunately for us in Nigeria, we are very united. The only thing we don't agree is which country has the best jollof. So we've learned a lot about petroleum cost auditing. In fact, when we discovered oil, Ghana's emphasis was more on the petroleum management, the revenue management, how we are spending the revenue. So we passed the law, the Petroleum Revenue Management Law. PIAC was established, but when you look at their mandate to look at more at how we are spending the revenues. Yes. So today we doing a very important exercise and going to look at petroleum costs, and as the MC introduced. There are 4 main or 6 main issues we are going to look at: the laws, information, time frame, coordination, capacity, and accountability. So I'll start with Mr. Sackey. Thank you. Mr. Sackey is the acting head of the petroleum unit of the Ghana Revenue Authority. Please say, what is the scope of petroleum cost auditing? I mean, what do you do? What do you look for? And are there any challenges? Are these challenges aligned to what we just heard?
Thank you very much. For the petroleum industry in Ghana, we of the Ghana Revenue Authority have been given the mandate to audit all such industries in the upstream. The cost audit is guided by the petroleum agreement. For every petroleum agreement, there is an accounting guide attached to it. So if you look into any petroleum agreement, you see in the Annex 2, it gives the accounting guide. So this gives a sort of standard as to how all the petroleum agreements or all the petroleum or all the IOCs are supposed to account to the government in terms of presentation of the account statement, the account arriving at credits, debits, and other things. All these things are guided by the accounting guide, which is in the Annex 2. So when we go for auditing, all that we look for is to make sure that they are obeying or sticking to the rules as stated in the accounting guide. The accounting guide states which costs are acceptable, which are allowable, which are not allowable. So that is the scope that is fully and explained in the accounting guide.
Okay, so let me come to you, Kwesi. You have worked in Kenya for a long time. You came to Ghana. Looking at Ghana's case, Kenya, in terms of petroleum cost auditing, what are we doing right and what are we not really getting right?
Thank you. I think just quickly to cut back to a point I think that Ali quite referred to in terms of the fact that unlike Ghana, Kenya, for example, lost out the opportunity to actually audit. And I think so it takes back to the time frame and the fact that somehow Ghana has been pretty smart in ensuring that there's a pre-approval and then also the possibility to go back and review from day one. I think that for me it's one important thing that I think that even as many more countries around our region explore, I mean from here all the way to Sierra Leone to Senegal, we need to push this agenda that we need to institute as part of our laws around costing in terms of the contracting, that we put in place systems to be able to allow these countries to be able to go back and review and to ensure that they're actually benefiting, well, essentially to be sure that what the companies claim to be their cost are accurate. I mean, after all, if you have public companies, public institutions being audited by the state, I don't see the reason why a private company, a major private company, I mean in a major and important sector such as oil and gas, shouldn't be audited and in terms of its accounts to ensure that the state is actually getting its fair share of what is naturally the citizens. And so I think for me it's one of the things that stands out in terms of cost auditing between the two countries.
Okay, thank you. Uncle Ben, let's look at two things. So one, Ghana has mechanisms for pre-auditing, which Kwesi is very happy about. Does it mean, we have a best system? That's the first one. The second is accountability has become a very major issue. In terms of oil, how much we receive, we publish. The price at which we sold the oil, we publish. How much we've produced, we published. But I've never seen a report from the cost auditing before. Why are we not making it public?
All right, thank you very much, and good afternoon. Thanks, Ali and Daniel, for the great work. It's been 2.5 years of discussing the need for this work to be done, and Oxfam took it up, and we now have a report, which is quite impressive. Coming back to the point about cost auditing. First of all, audits are done not necessarily to find out faults or to antagonize companies, and that is what we need to get from the word go, so that you don't delay when you have to do it. If you have to audit the companies every 2 years or 5 years, as is usually stated in the agreements, the institutions mandated to do that, they have to just go and do their work. There is no point delaying in delivering on that responsibility. In the oil and gas industry, cheating is attractive. Deceit is attractive. Because if you're producing, for example, 100,000 barrels per day, and you are able to manipulate the cost per $1 per barrel, that is $100,000 a day. So it's really attractive. It even puts you in a position whether you want to be a saint or show the shareholder value, as a company. So for countries, building capacity and ensuring that we exercise our right to audit companies cannot be compromised. We need to be able to do that. And not just by having it in law and as part of the contract, but having the right capacity and competency to be able to do it and do it right. That is what is even crucial. Because if you go open the books, you look at it, you are not able to find anything. It's as bad as not even auditing. So we need to be competent at delivering on that mandate. We need to be able to audit and audit well. GRA has been doing okay, but you also realize that they largely depend on third-party data from the National Oil Company, because it is assumed that the National Oil Company is part of the arrangement, and therefore they would have approved the cost, and that should suffice. But I see it this way. The information that the National Oil Company gives you, the information that the International Oil Company gives you, presents sets of data that should allow the GRA to be able to triangulate based on your own expertise and capacity to say that from our technical position as auditors, this is what we see wrong, this is what we think is right to deliver. It is not enough to rely so much on other state agencies because they are there. Mind you, they have other roles that could be more paramount to them. The regulator may be busy doing local content and other stuff. The National Oil Company may be busier looking at how to protect its interest in the field. But as auditors, you also have a peculiar duty to critically look at the numbers. And even where the other state agencies have gotten it wrong, you can then point it out. And that is what probably GRA needs to understand and build its competency and capacity. Usually when this point is thrown out, either they will say we have the capacity, or they would admit that we don't have the money to buy or procure the engineers that will be able to understand how a component in an FPSO, for example, costs, or how drilling costs. But the reality is that you do not need to host all this expertise in-house. You can procure them as and when you need them. That is why we have experts, we have consultants who specialize in these specifics. So when you need them, you go and procure. It's not necessary to go and have a cost engineer on rigs to come and sit down, another engineer on another subject to come and sit down and be paying monthly salaries. You just need to strategize to see where you can source capacity and make them useful for your need. So it is extremely important. We are operating industries in our region where we've been talking about local content all day, and we are struggling to even take 5%, 10% share. So what that means is that investment is being attracted. You discover oil, and they say that the cost of developing the field is $6-7 billion. What that means is that before you even start pumping oil out of the ground, you have front-loaded $7 billion into another economy, because you are not producing the risers, you're not producing the Christmas tree and all the engineering stuff that is needed. And if you're not careful to scrutinize those numbers, and if say $1 billion or 500,000 is, pushed in there, you're losing more. So it's a very important subject for us to look at, to see how we would be able to audit the companies and audit them appropriately. What I keep saying is that where you don't have the capacity, and even when you have the capacity, information asymmetry and data could make it very difficult for you to really track the numbers. And I keep saying that 50 cents, 20 cents could be so significant, and you may ignore them. If you don't have the technical eye to look at these things, what I would do is to put $10 million aside to say, who is going to give me information on companies cheating, and take the $10 million. And I put a penalty of $20 million on the company who is cheating. So you have created a monitoring tool that may even end up not allowing companies to cheat, because they know that the penalty is high, it's huge. So we have to begin creating incentive for dishonesty, create incentive for people, because they work with human beings. And the numbers are padded by human beings. So put whistleblower mechanisms in your approach for people to want to provide information so that you can be effective at delivering your work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Uncle Ben. Cheating is attractive in the oil and gas sector. It's also attractive in examinations. Yes, let me come to Kwesi on the issue of accountability.
Before then, I think,
you want to react to so?
The petroleum industry is always on the move. You can't catch them up when you don't update yourself to build capacity in order to also see into the cost that they provide. So our petroleum agreement mandates the IOCs to file their costs under the agreement to GNPC, Article 18. So GNPC is in a position to see whatever costs they have, and then both physically and then materially, and then what is in the books, because they also serve as partners to them. And so for us at GRA, what they do, what we see is what they present to us in their returns. So in order to authenticate what we find in our returns, we need third parties to help us, not that we rely on them. So, for instance, we contact GNPC to verify whether the costs presented to us are indeed the actual cost that is also sent to them. And then also, there are cases where some of the costs, you know, we as accountants cannot be able to see into it very well because of maybe the description. So in this case, if we say something like geological, if it has some background of geological, geophysical, and other things, we sitting in GRA may not be able to decipher. So what we do is that we have institutional collaboration. Like we see if this institution has the geophysicists, geoscientists, and other things who can do so. Then, for instance, we have relied on Petroleum Commission before, we have relied on GNPC before, and many others to help us know the actual cost, whether it is wholly, exclusively, and necessary for petroleum operation. So it is not as if we solely rely on GNPC or others, but then when the need arises, we fall on them for them to help us, because there's nowhere that as an tax institution alone can do everything. No, we need the help of these people too, because if I'm not mistaken, Uganda, for instance, Uganda Revenue Authority once contracted Ernst & Young to help them in the cost auditing. You see, so we may not have maybe the financial resources to do so, but we have relied on the in-house capacity we have to do it. Had it not been the inconsistencies in the law in the first auditing we did, it was all right, because the IOCs themselves were even impressed with what we did, because they were thinking that this being the first time, we will not be able to do it. But then we were able to do it. Had it not been the inconsistencies that in the law, you wouldn't have even heard anything that cost auditing has raised some issue. You see? So I think we are doing well, not badly at all.
Okay, Mr. Zek, just a quick follow-up. So do you have, for instance, an in-house capacity plan that, for instance, the next 5 years you're going to budget for, not rely on donor or VRA's budget, GRA's budget, you're going to budget for capacity development, and even where there's no capacity, you're going to engage, like Ernst & Young, as you said, a third party. No, you're not going to appeal to them, but you're going to engage consultants to help you in the areas you identify where you may have challenges. Do you have something like that?
Yes. You know, every year we sort of do in-house capacity needs and see which areas indeed we fall short. And when these, let me say, GOGIG, GIZ come in, then we tell them this is the area that we need help. You see, so when it comes to improving on capacity building, these are the people who normally help us. And then thirdly, the Ministry of Finance also comes in. For instance, this year, the Deputy Minister came, contacted us, and then we sat down with him, and we realized that there's a need for someone to come and then serve as a supervisor for some sort, somebody who has experience in the field to come and and be in the background as we go and come, discuss with him as to what we see and what we should be done. See, so he has put in a request for some sort of an advisor to come from outside who has the requisite experience to come and help us in that for at least for some 6 months.
Okay. So what you are, the last two, what you are saying is that beyond GOGIG and this arrangement with Ministry of Finance,
Formerly, it was World Bank to was helping us.
Yes, but what I mean, you have a budget at GRA, right?
Yes.
And this is a large tax issue,
yes.
Oil costing.
Yes.
Don't you have internal budget that this year we are setting aside 2 million cedis to build the capacity of the petroleum unit to do cost auditing? Is that something available without donor or appeal and all those ones?
You know, the problem we have is that our unit, what the revenue we collect doesn't come to GRA. So normally, if there's any help, it comes from the Ministry of Finance.
Okay.
So GRA per se doesn't have an exclusive budget for the petroleum unit for capacity building. Okay. It comes from Ministry of Finance.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Kwesi, so on the issue of accountability, civil society actors play a very important role. We don't hear, in fact, Ghana here, we don't know much about the results of even the process, cost auditing and all those ones in terms of civil society. I'm saying we because I was also in civil society. I just recently retired. So why are we not making the results of cost or in the process of cost auditing public? What is holding us back?
Well, thanks. I mean, this is a question that should be directed to the minister. Unfortunately, you allowed him to go. Now you're putting it to me. So this is going to be just a guesswork. But it's a very serious question because, I mean, without transparency, it's very difficult to tell for anyone to convince us that what the state claims to be doing is the right thing. I mean, there's no evidence. But I wanted us to situate this whole conversation in a broader context because I think it's important. In the political economy of let's say, Kenya and Ghana, because essentially these are the two African countries. Now, these are two countries that have moved us so-called to lower middle income status. And that has implications on these economies in terms of their capacity to finance development. We won't go into that because that's not part of the conversation, but I think it's important to refract this conversation through that lens because we need, as a country, to step up and raise the resources we need to finance this economy. Because part of the problem with local content is also because you don't have the space to support local industries to be able to contribute. Now you have all this deindustrialization in the country. Companies that could have been supplying the companies with some of the things we're talking about, they can't because they don't have the resources. And so for me, I think it's important for us to link this to the country's ability to finance its own development. And that's why the whole thing around cost auditing is important. And so in having this conversation, I think we also have to look at some of these. So we have the rules, we have the laws, but then we also have our states signing on to kinds of deals and treaties that basically do not necessarily speak to the laws. Again, we will not go into that, but I think that it's important to flag some of these issues because there was a point made by Ali around coordination. Part of the treaties reflect the fact that the institutions we have don't speak to each other. And so we give away this, and then another institution also gives away that. And because there's no coordination, invariably it's the state that loses and therefore undermines our capacity to mobilize the resources we need to finance our development. But back to your point around accountability, I mean, the question, frankly, is why is this not public information? I'm not quite sure, but I think the concerns raised by the earlier panel around, somehow a particular type of capture of the state, because there's no reason for us not to have access, whether in the first place there's been an audit, and two, whether the audit found out anything, and also if it found out what is it that the state actually did or is planning to do, and the systems is putting in place. So I think it goes back to a more fundamental challenge around our democratization, the process. So when I talk about the democratization process, I think it's not enough for us to have elections. It's not enough for us to simply push for the laws around some of these issues, but actually we need to push for an open space. If we look at it, not just simply in this country, but in quite a number of countries, the space for civil society to even articulate for transparency around some of these things are actually shrinking. Fortunately, in Ghana, it's not quite, but if you look at it, the fact that the state, well, Parliament has failed to pass the Freedom of Information Act. That in itself speaks to a certain disinterest in opening up the space for citizens to participate and engage and have a clearer sense of what is happening. And so I'm not quite sure, I'm unable to respond directly to your question about what explains it, but I think it speaks to the capture of the state and the capture of the resources and the capture that I think we need to get to open the space up for more citizens and for more actors to play a more active role in ensuring that issues around this, one, the state carries out its responsibility. Two, it's made public knowledge. You know that when the Auditor General audits public institutions and it goes to Parliament and the Parliamentary Committee sits, you get to feel the sense of what people actually think about this country. And I think the sentiments people express, people come up with also solutions, but they also express, it helps people in figuring out whom to choose in the next phase of election. So I do feel that it's important for us to deepen our democratization by pushing further for openness around some of the core issues that affect ordinary people around, particularly in the case of this country and Kenya and many other African countries, the extractive sector.
Thank you very much, Kwesi. So, Uncle Ben, you made a very important point. So the last one, then we go to the floor. You made a very important point of getting people to more like give information. For instance, in fact, Botswana is doing that. They call it anonymous tip-off, and I think it's working. But the OECD guidelines were passed. We even have the Africa Task Forum. Then we have the UN operational manual and all this. All these have been done. Countries are changing their task force. They are doing all those things. So beyond the law, yeah, you mentioned a lot. Practically, just two things. What can we do in terms of coordination, information sharing? For instance, should we have an MOU between GRA and GMPC? What should we do to make sure that, yes, we get the right figure? Because this is revenue maximization. I think it's even more important than the spending. If you don't have it, you can't spend it. What can we do practical beyond the laws, the treaties, the nice grammar?
Yeah, thank you. I think a lot is being done. Automatic exchange of information is gradually happening, so that should help GRA to get information, be able to do cost benchmarking. But ultimately, this is business. It's oil and gas business. Somebody has invested to make money. You also have a resource that is being extracted, and you have to take your share. So you don't have to be afraid to audit. Go in when you have to. That is what it comes to. You may sign all the treaty, you may have all the information. If you don't do what you're supposed to do, you're not getting what you deserve. So that is all it comes to. I mean, GRA, for example, is supposed to audit oil companies and actually tax the oil companies, but that is not even accounted for as part of their targets and receivables for the year. So what is the incentive for them to even do their job and do it right? So These are some of the things that could be some loose points that can be tightened. We need to give them some of the money. Somebody is taking oil money and giving it to you, and you say, we are not giving anything for capacity development, and so on and so forth. We have to look at that and incentivize them, get men of integrity, capable, and highly paid to be able to deliver on the job that we have given them. There is no shortcut to this. We have to do the right thing, build the capacity, incentivize people, and where the capacity doesn't really exist, allow people to give you the information in exchange for cash. And that works.
Thank you very much. So I've underlined highly paid. So I'll now open the floor for questions. If you have any question. So, okay. The first one at the back. So just brief one sentence.
Hello, too. Okay. My first question is about Alexis' presentation earlier on. She made an assertion that depending on the regime and how the audits or cost and revenue audits is seen, I want her to be clear a little on that. Because if I came in as an auditor to audit maybe an upstream company, I look at the assets, maybe proved reserve, developed reserve, or possible or probable, among others. I go to the revenues, check whether it's in tandem with the agreements, and then if I see Rustabout Labor or Christmas tree, I'll just ask, and they will tell me the composition of such expenses, and I will audit accordingly, or I'll check accordingly whether everything has gone on as it's supposed to be. So if there's any prescribed way, depending on the fiscal regime, maybe she should clarify a little for some of us to learn from. And then secondly, the type of skills and expertise that an auditor should have. Maybe if she can throw more light on that with regard to the sector, I would much appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, so the second one. So the first ones were addressed to Mr. Saki. Oh, okay. So the second one.
Okay. I want to ask Anchor Ben. We'll be asking these questions over and over again about the monitoring of the production. I understand there's a device attached to the rigs which monitors the production levels. But how are we sure that these devices are not tampered with? And who monitors the devices? Then the second question goes to the revenue man. I think that we are not satisfied with the responses they give to us, because the sources of getting your information is like from the same source. You get it from GNPC, you get it from the companies. If there is a collaboration between those two people, how do you know that the figures they are giving you are the right ones? Thank you.
Okay, so yes, the third one, then we can answer and come for another round.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Jumo, once again. My question is about the capacity building. I'm much interested in that aspect. As you were saying, Mr. Saki, if I get the name right, was saying that they are collaborating to bring someone from outside to the country to help monitor these things that we are talking about. And we are here crying for local content. Number one, for what I know, when oil was discovered in Ghana, Tullow Oil built one lab at Takra, the Technical University. And during that time, we were told that they are going to train people so that they can take over these things. It's been 11 years now. KNUST also had a building over there, and we listened to the same lectures telling us that they are going to train people so that they can take these things as being as a local content being in there. And now we are here receiving information that people are going to be sent from outside to the country to fill those gaps. I think it's very questionable. Then where is the memorandum of understanding that they are going to train the people? Are we ready, Or is it that we are not proactive enough? That's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. So the first question, we'll come back.
Thanks. I'm not sure that I totally grasped all of the question, but as I understood it, I think the point was to elaborate a bit on the different types of fiscal regimes and whether that affects how you verify costs. Forgive me if that wasn't the question. We can follow up afterward. The point is that a cost recovery audit and a tax audit are basically trying to do something, which is to verify the costs that have been incurred by companies that are either eligible for cost recovery or indeed eligible for tax deduction. Now, as Mr. Saki said, the costs that are eligible for either cost recovery or tax deduction will be elaborated upon either in an annex to the production sharing contract or petroleum agreement, or spelled out in the law, which is usually the case in terms of taxes, is that you'll also have information on what are the eligible costs for tax in the income tax code. So the first point is to determine what's the relevant source of law and the relevant set of costs that are eligible for deduction. Then the process of verification is broadly the same. Look to collect all the necessary invoices and other documents related to those costs that are claimed. You might then take a sample of the costs. You're then going to evaluate some of those expenditures. So you're going to look at what the work plan was that was pre-approved by the Petroleum Commission, for example, and how does that compare to the costs that are being claimed subsequently. You might then rely on the use of benchmark data. So if you have access to databases that will help you to determine whether those costs, whether the level of the cost is appropriate. So really, you know, the process is largely the same both for cost recovery and tax audit. The difference lies in the set of costs that are eligible for cost recovery deduction. Oftentimes those types of costs will differ. For example, the cost of finance. So when an oil and gas project here takes a loan from a bank or from a related, it's going to pay interest on that loan. Whether that interest expense is deductible will depend on your fiscal regime, and usually if you're relying on a tax and royalty regime, interest expense or the cost of interest will be eligible for tax deduction but not eligible for cost recovery. So your audit depends on what are the costs that are eligible for cost recovery versus tax audit. Then once you've established that, then the audit process is largely the same. The difference again will then be around how you treat those costs. So for example, in a tax regime, those costs will be subject to depreciation. So those are some of the nuances, but I think the process itself is broadly the same. You're really trying to investigate whether the cost was eligible, whether the company is allowed to claim that cost, and then is the level of the cost appropriate or is it too high? If you take the example of the transfer pricing case, is the cost paid for technical services from an affiliate, is that cost too high, or does that seem about right based on your benchmarks? So the process of audit is about determining eligibility and then verifying whether the level of the cost is appropriate, regardless of whether or not you're doing a cost recovery or a tax audit.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Saki, 2 minutes to respond to the questions, then 1 minute for your last words.
Okay. First of all, the man asked why we rely so much on GNPC and whether GNPC will not collaborate with the IOCs to dupe the country. I don't see it that way, because GNPC is a national oil company working in the interests of the state, and they have formed partnership with all the 17 contracts, and all importations that are purposely for petroleum operation is done in collaboration with GNPC. So if Tullow is supposed to import machinery, it's done in collaboration with GNPC. If Tullow is going to incur some costs, GNPC is part of the joint management team, which is formed by the IOC. So GNPC knows the inside out of every cost that is incurred by every international oil company. So if we are relying on GNPC, I think it's in the right direction, because there's no way GNPC, as a national company, will try to swerve or dupe the nation. So there's no way, in my view, GNPC cannot do that. And we also rely on Petroleum Commission. Petroleum Commission is also work in collaboration with these international oil companies. So we in GRA link with these two entities to help us to do our auditing work. So I don't think it's wrong to be contacting GNPC or Petroleum Commission. And also, you know, it is GOGIC, the request made by the minister is being handled by GOGIC. And the expression of interest was done by GOGIC. And the background of the expert we needed, I don't think we can find some in Ghana. We look into, you know, the local content law is saying that if we cannot get any expert, and I say we should rely on home capacity. But if we don't have it, what else can we do? We have to go outside. So the expression of interest done by GOGIC says that the background of the person in the petroleum industry should be between 15 to 20 years experience. And so that person, I don't think we can have some in Ghana. And so we are relying on experts from outside. We are relying on experts from outside who will come and be at the back door to help us when we go out for the auditing work. When we come back, we discuss with them to know what we should do and what we should not do so far as the auditing work is concerned. So the expression of interest is being done. And I don't know how GOGIC is going to go about it. They will put the advert out there. And if there is anybody in Ghana who can also apply, I think it's not wrong. So GOGIC is handling that.
Okay, Kwesi, so your last words, just 1 minute.
Well, I mean, I think my last words will be the fact that cost auditing is an important part and we need to take it seriously. But even more so, we need to push for, one, the proper cost auditing. So the systems, we need to put in place the systems that would allow us to ensure that we actually are doing the proper auditing, but even more, to make the system transparent. And lastly, I want to cut back to the point by Mr. Saki. I think, and a point earlier made by Ali, if we have to wait for an external party to fund a multi-agency that is supposed to help us in managing the petroleum sector, I think we have a misguided direction. I mean, we're headed in the wrong direction. I think we need to invest our own resources in ensuring that the sector benefits, one, that the sector grows and benefits the people, and define our own priorities. Because as it is, now, he talked about, you know, having to rely on others. I think it's great if you don't have the capacity, but I think the question that I hear coming is, how are we putting in place systems to get our people to be up so that we can actually also transfer the technology, the knowledge across? And I don't hear that. And I think that part of this conversation is, one, that it's not just simply cost auditing for its own sake, but how does it ensure that the country optimizes its natural resources? Remember, oil and gas, they're finite, and therefore we need to transition. And I think it's on the basis of that that we had the earlier conversation around industrialization. So how do we, on the back of the resources we have, transition out of it to build an economy that can endure beyond oil, gas, and mining?
Thank you very much, Kwesi. So, Uncle Ben, final words.
Right. Thank you very much. I think we just have to know that it is not a trust game. It's a professional game. So you have to do what you have to do and make sure you do it right. We need to build the capacity to be able to deliver that. I hear local content issues coming up. Why can't we get the experts locally? Probably it's a signal to local auditors who are interested in the oil and gas industry to build their capacity, so that when such consultancies are floated, they will be able to pick those opportunities up, and across the region, we need to have people identifying their roles and building capacity over time. If we have, local auditing firms, GRA and other revenue authorities across the region can rely on them to be able to do the auditing for them. But essentially, that is what we have to realize, that if it is time to audit, you go in and you audit. You don't have to wait. You don't have to think that the data you have is okay and therefore you don't have to look at the numbers. Don't even give the opportunity for companies to think that they may not even come after all. It's a duty, it's a professional duty that ought to be delivered. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, yes, cost auditing is very important. That is where we can get our revenues. If you don't have it, you can't spend it. We have to spend on free SHS, so many other things. But we need money, so we have to take it very, very seriously. Now, what it means is that we have to build systems. We have to invest in the capacity. We don't have to, when you're getting money from somewhere, that's not so bad, but we have to put some budget line that this is what we're going to use to build our capacity. And we have to also use Ghanaians. The gentleman said it, at least advertised. And if people apply and we don't get, then we can at least say we did not get anyone. But we cannot write ourselves off at the initial stages. So on that note, I wish to thank you for your patience and for your collaboration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So we are now approaching our final session, and we will invite to make a presentation, after which I will interact with him briefly and then open that session really to the audience. There'll be a lot of audience interaction when it comes to this. This is on financing local content, and the presentation will be delivered by Mr. Kweku Boateng. He is the head local content of the Petroleum Commission, Ghana, and he's here with us. A round of applause for Mr. Kweku Boateng, who is making his way to deliver, to make his presentation, after which we'll interact with him briefly, and then we'll end today's session and wait for another one tomorrow when, of course, more interesting things will be discussed. Finance and local content, Mr. Kweku Boateng, ladies and gentlemen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a little bit late, so I'll try to make it brief so that if there are questions, you can discuss the questions. As I said, I will discuss with you briefly the alternative methods of financing local content in the upstream petroleum industry. I think that the previous speakers have talked about local content and the need to maximize local content in the upstream petroleum industry. Let's see what to do. Why local content upstream industry? The evidence in many resource-rich countries clearly suggests that countries that have made or have achieved significant benefit from their resources are those countries that have either participated directly or indirectly in the exploitation of those resources. And the country can benefit from those resources when the citizens of that country actually participate in the process that brings about the exploitation and utilization of these resources. The government of Ghana, having realized this notion, brought about local content policy in 2010 and later in 2013 local content regulations, with the objective of maximizing local content in the upstream petroleum sector. The need for local content in the petroleum upstream sector actually emanates from the benefits that you can derive from local content in there. I don't know whether the money from the benefit that you can derive from local content and Ghanaian participation in the industry. Through local content, you can establish sectoral linkage between the oil and gas sector and the rest of the economy. Naturally, petroleum industry tends to be an enclave economy with minimal interaction or interface with the rest of the economy. You look at Ghana, our production at our trade fields, Jubilee, TEN, and FPSO. We produce the oil over there, we store them on the FPSO, a shuttle tanker will come and take the oil and we export it. So without a deliberate effort on the government, the sector will have very minimal interface with the rest of the economy. So one objective with local content to enhance sectoral linkage, both forward linkage and the backward linkage with the rest of the economy. It will also avenue for job creation, both direct job and indirect jobs. The oil industry, being capital intensive in nature, creates minimum amount of job. Most of the job will emanate from indirect activities, and therefore local content becomes very important avenue for enhancing these indirect jobs. It's also an avenue for mobilizing revenue for both the local government and the central government. Local content development can also enhance industrial development. You have seen how through the local content and the linkage development, the economy of Atuabo Township and surrounding areas, and as well as the Zanzure area, have been transformed overnight. It's also an avenue for technology transfer and human resource development. However, promoting local content over the years in Ghana and in many other jurisdictions faces a number of setbacks. One of the key constraints is the information asymmetry between local companies and their well-developed foreign counterparts. There is also lack of capacity among many local companies. These companies are very small, poorly structured, and most of them lack requisite technical certification to be able to participate and win big contracts. But one important constraint, which was also identified by local content policy, is lack of funding for indigenous Ghanaian participation. There are several factors that deter investment in the oil and gas industry or make it very difficult for local companies to acquire requisite funding. In many developing countries, there's inadequate legal and regulatory framework to regulate the oil and gas sector, which makes lending to the sector very risky. Most of the projects, especially exploration and production projects, are very capital intensive, long-term in nature, and therefore financial institutions see these projects as very risky and very reluctant to lend to those projects. The duration of this project, as I said, is also very long, and therefore, unless you have a financial market which is very big and very liquid, they are less willing to lend for such long-term projects. And of course, our local banks here in Ghana also have constraints in financing oil and gas projects. The operating environment is also quite difficult in terms of high inflation, exchange rate instability, and other factors make the operating environment very difficult for banking sector to lend to oil and gas sector. This is also worsened by limited technical capability among the local companies and for the ability to win big contracts, and execute them successfully. There's also insufficient information between the petroleum sector and the rest of the economy, especially the financial sector. We had a study last year about 2 years ago, with the banking sector, trying to find out why there's little interest in financing projects in the oil and gas sector. And it's very clear that there's very little information within the banking sector about the projects within the oil and gas sector. And therefore, most of them see the oil and gas sector as very risky. What initiatives are government taking to enhance local content? Through the legislation and regulatory activity, government has taken a number of initiatives to move local content. One was the passage of Petroleum Exploration Production Law, Act 919, 2016, which clearly sets clear requirements in the law for IOCs and service companies to make local content an important component of the operations. And I'll talk about local content LI 2004, which put obligation on the IOC and service companies to implement local content and achieve local content targets. The Commission have also developed guidelines to promote local content. And recently, the last one, which was launched some few weeks back here in Accra and later last week in Cape Town, also clearly make a local content requirement as an important evaluation criteria for any company that want to bid for blocks in Ghana here. How does funding requirement arise here? There are three important provisions in the local content regulations, which mandates all foreign companies operating in Ghana to involve Ghanaian companies in their operations. The first is Regulation 42 of LI 2004, which requires that the companies that intend to undertake exploration and production activities, they must include a Ghanaian company and ensure that they give a Ghanaian company a minimum of 5% equity participation in their operations. And Regulation 46 requires that the service companies, those who are providing services to the oil and gas sector, also form joint venture with Ghanaian company and offer Ghanaian company a minimum of 10% equity participation. And this participation from the intention of the law are not free carried. They are not free as we have for GMPC free carried. They have to be paid by Ghanaian companies. And this brings this issue of funding as to how this participation could be funded. There are three sets of activities, avenues, in which we need funding for local participation. One is funding for supply chain development or participation. Supply chain, you mean the companies, individual Ghanaian companies that intend to provide various services or supply various goods and services, various goods to the oil and gas sector. They need funding. Another one is human capacity development. Ghanaian personnel that want to work in the oil and gas sector need to enhance their capacity. That capacity development also needs funding. And then enterprise development in terms of building the capacity of Ghanaian companies, helping them to acquire the requisite technical certification, the ISO certification, IRATA certification, etc. All this need to be funded. On the basis of this, a number of programs are required if you want to achieve, or if you must achieve the objective of local content policy in the LI. Some of the programs include business incubation program, skill development program, technical cooperation and capacity building, as well as business linkage program. There are various sorts of funds for these activities. These programs, by their nature, are not commercial activities, and therefore we don't expect the banks and the other financial institutions to fund this capacity development program. The obvious source of funding are the government funding and the donor funding. So here, some of these programs that have been earmarked to develop capacity of Ghanaian companies and enhance local content. We are looking at state funding from the government. We last year launched AOGC, oil and gas capacity, accelerated oil and gas capacity building project, which was launched by the government of Ghana, intend to raise money to fund capacity development of Ghanaian professionals, Ghanaian enterprise. The Act 919, which is the Petroleum Exploration Production Law, also provides for the establishment of local content fund, which also could provide money to fund some of these programs. And we also have support from some donor agencies. We have DFID that have been helping in funding some of these capacity building projects. USAID in the past through the PIZERA, or Ghana Supply Chain Development. They have also funded some of these programs. So as I said, the enterprise development have been supported by the donor agencies and some IOCs. Jubilee partners, TALO, GMPC, and ADACO and others, they, in collaboration with Ministry of Energy, set up EDC, Enterprise Development Center, to build capacity of Ghanaian companies. They also set up JTTC, Jubilee Technical Training Center, at University, Ghanaians in the technical areas. For these programs, that, as I said, in many countries, these programs are state funded because they are not commercial in nature. So we have countries such as Trinidad and Tobago, Malaysia, Nigeria, and Brazil. All these capacity development programs are funded through state support. Then when it comes to projects, which are basically commercial in nature and are done by private sector, we recommend that the private companies, being the IGC, that is indigenous Ghanaian companies, that want to participate in these projects, either at the EMP level or at the service level, they must raise their own money to fund these projects. And there are a number of funding options. One is the traditional sources are basically owner's equity, where the owners of the company raise money either through their balance sheets or involve some partners to raise money to finance their participation in oil and gas operations. There are a number of benefits with owner's equity here. It's very immediate and it's less burdensome, and it doesn't involve cost to external parties. And when the project fails, it doesn't have much impact on the economy in terms of the banking crisis. But the challenge here is that it's very difficult to raise, and for many businessmen, this will dilute the shareholders' equity. Other source is bank loans, either short-term banking finance or long-term loan. So those who have intend to participate in oil and gas projects can get loan from the bank. The challenge here is that, as I said earlier on, the banks in Ghana in particular are less willing to give long-term financing, not only for oil and gas projects, but for many projects. And the terms and conditions, in many cases, are very prohibitive. One is the high interest rate, which makes many Ghanaian companies less competitive. The interest rate in Ghana is normally in double digits. These Ghanaian companies will be competing against their foreign counterparts who will be raising interest rates at 5% or below. While our company could be raising interest, be borrowing from the bank at the interest rate on 20% and above, which made them less competitive. Another source of financing is the mezzanine finance, which is a hybrid of debt and equity. For mezzanine finance basically is very suitable for financing long-term projects. So here, the lender that borrows money to the company that wants to participate in oil and gas projects reserves the right to convert its debt into equity should the borrower fail to pay the money. So that gives the lender some kind of comfort in giving the money for long-term projects. Then you have others such as public bonds. Public bonds are brought it here for certain reasons, but basically public bonds are municipal or local government bonds that is used to fund projects that benefit general public. It's not meant for private or individual projects. I brought it here because some municipalities or the district assemblies in the western region have expressed desire to participate in oil and gas activities, especially the E&P activities. So they intend to have their own SPV that can partner with some foreign companies to undertake oil and gas projects. So for such district assemblies, one option available to them to fund their project is through public bonds. For private companies, they can issue retail bonds, which is a special type of corporate bonds, and it's a means of borrowing money from the investors, whereby the borrower, the company, will promise to pay a fixed interest to the lender, and at the predetermined maturity date, the principal will be redeemed. So this will be also an option available to the private sector who want to borrow money. However, the traditional source of funding basically have a number of challenges. One is strict requirements. As I said, the banking sector basically impose very strict lending conditions. And for many Ghanaian companies that want to enter into oil and gas, few of them will be able to meet the conditions. For instance, if you want to go and borrow money, if you want to build a contract for service activities, the IOCs will require that you demonstrate your ability to finance the project. That if you don't have the requisite balance sheet, they will want evidence that the bank will be prepared to give you a loan. When they go to the bank will also demand evidence of contracts before they can lend them loan. So most of them find themselves in catch-22 situation. And you have instances whereby even when they succeed in getting the contract, some banks still demand a kind of collateral rather than depending on the project, especially revenue from the project, to give them the comfort for repayment. They demand collateral. Banks have explained that in the past, some companies, even after they have shown good faith in giving them loan, once the money is given and so once the contract is awarded and they agree on a scheduled repayment period plan. So what happens is that if you borrow money from the bank agrees that the IOC will pay your contract sum to the bank that you are borrowing the money from. Some of them, after getting the money and getting the contract, they go and open an account for another bank, and the payment will be made through that bank. And banks find it difficult to get their money back. And some of these contracts are very short-term contracts, 1 year, 2 year contracts, or even less than 1 year. Before the bank realizes the contract is finished, they get the money and they are not getting their repayment back. So nowadays, even if you have a contract, some of the banks still require that you provide collateral. There's also low debt capacity among the junior Ghanaian companies. Low debt capacity in the sense that they have weak balance sheets and the ability to raise huge amounts to finance their project is also constrained. And I've talked about unfavorable banking terms as well. Beyond these traditional funding options, there are other more recent financing arrangements. Some of these are royalty contracts, streaming contracts, share contracts, asset-backed financing. The royalty contract basically entitles the lender who will lend money to the company a fixed percentage of revenue from the project. So once the lender lends money to the individual Ghanaian company and they win the contract, they agree that they will be given a fixed percentage of the project revenue. Other one is the streaming contract, which is sometimes, the streaming contract is very common in the mining industry. Sometimes they call it resource streaming or metal pitches. And basically, the lender or the investor makes an upfront payment to the resource company or to the, in our case, to the IGC. And they reserve the right to purchase a fixed percentage of future production at an agreed price. And this is normally used when we are at the development stage. So suppose there's an IGC, the Ghanaian company, partner in the EMP project, and they have made commercial discovery and they are at the development stage, and the IGC is finding it difficult to finance its cash call for development. It can resort to streaming contracts to raise money to finance its share of development. Then you have what we call shared contract. Basically, you have companies coming together to execute contracts. So here they can put up a joint bid, two separate companies. And when they win the contract, they raise the funding to finance it. Here the purpose is to mitigate risk and also solve the problem of inability to raise funding. Then you have the asset or contract-backed financing, where the amount loaned is secured by assets of the company or receivables from the contract. This is very similar to your traditional project financing. The other alternatives such as cost sharing, and here is very for IGCs that want to participate in EMP projects. I mentioned the 5% participation. This is one option where the cost of the project, either at the exploration stage or development stage, is categorized and assigned. So the individual Ghanaian company could be assigned to bear a certain proportion of the cost. And that cost that it bears will be converted to its equity holding in their company. So when the IGC is coming, the Ghanaian company can decide to finance or acquire all the requisite permits and approvals for them. They will pay for the cost of administration, the office building, logistics, and others. And then this cost should be estimated and then assigned as the IGC's contribution towards the project financing or towards the equity contribution. We can also have deferred payments when the Ghanaian companies find it difficult to finance its share of equity for oil and gas development. Here, the IOC may carry, I don't want to call it carry, but may carry the Ghanaian company at the initial stage, maybe at the exploration and development stage, and then when they start production, then the Ghanaian company will pay for the cost of its equity participation at an agreed interest rate. But here, the interest rate should not be commercial interest rate. It should be the interest rate, it should be quasi-commercial, in the sense that it should be the interest rate at which the IGC itself, the interest rate should not be higher than the interest rate that IGC parent company may borrow from the bank. In Ghana here, they also have what they call Ghana Alternative Market, which is a power market operated by GSE, Ghana Stock Exchange. And basically, this market focuses on companies with strong growth potential. And money can also be raised by companies for startups and other small and medium companies to finance the operation at GX. Now, I mentioned Local Content Fund, which is a fund set up by the state, or let me put it this way. Local Content Fund is provided for by Petroleum Law Act 919, and it is the purpose of this fund is to provide financial resources for Ghanaian companies and Ghanaian individuals to finance their operations and develop their capacity. Here, the loans are expected to be given either on a concessionary interest rate, or in some cases on grant basis to those who want to develop their capacity. The source of the fund, as provided for in the law, is various. One, the main source of the fund is that all contracts that are awarded in the upstream industry, the subcontractors will make 1% contribution to the fund. Government can also, through budgetary allocation, make provision and the budget to be paid to the fund. Other money that are approved by Parliament can also be paid to the fund, and also donors may also make contribution to the fund. So these are basically both the traditional, conventional and non-conventional source of financing local content. So in conclusion, what I would say is that Ghana as a country is very committed to creating an enable environment for maximizing local content, and at the same time attracting investment to the upstream sector. We will continue to ensure a sustainable management of oil and gas resources for the benefit of the people of this country. And the Petroleum Commission on our part will ensure that the local content fund that is set up will manage in an efficient and transparent manner to enhance the development of local content in this country. Thank you very much for your attention.
So, okay, interesting conversation, and I want to invite us to have a conversation on the back of what we've just heard. I want to start from the bread and butter angles of this. There's a lot of technical detail of the legislation, etc., but I just want to start from the bread and butter bit. And I want to, whilst we were at lunch, I met a few students and their lecturers who had traveled all the way from the University of Cape Coast, I think, to this place. And I'm pretty sure there are other schools represented here. And if you're here and you're a student or you're a lecturer, please raise your hands, because I just show by hands. Fantastic. So a lot of people here from schools. And I want to go to the one of the things that Ms. Oben, you touched on with the local content with regards to human resource capacity development, something that you touched on. And over the years, and in fact, if you see how we've spent our revenues from the oil sector, you see that that line item, capacity development, is quite consistent, and there's a lot of money that we put there. In fact, if you look at the allocations, I've always seen sometimes capacity building getting far more allocation than agriculture, for example. And I know civil society has criticized this over the years. But my question is, what is the point of human resource capacity development when the capacity once developed cannot be put to use? Because I was just chatting with, and this is anecdotal, I was chatting with a lecturer who was making the point that once they finished school, I was asking them, what's the ability of the industry to absorb the people that we build their capacity? And he said, well, that's a challenge, because the industries are still employing foreigners. And I want the students here to share their own experiences and their own fears and aspirations. Let's get a microphone to the gentleman back there. As we discuss local content, I want us to break it down to how it affects people. If we're going to spend all the money in human resources development, there are other areas, supply chain and enterprise development, we'll talk about if once the conversation expands. But I want to start from this premise. So assuming the fund is available, and we know government is already putting a lot of money into the human resource capacity, are we getting value for money for all the monies we spent in capacity development? I don't know what the situation is in Kenya and Tanzania, etc. But yes, let me hear you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Philip Koshi Bangini. I'm an MSc student, Petroleum Geoscience, University of Ghana. We keep talking about local content for the past 7 or 8 years, but I can confidently say that my department produces between for first degree, second degree, and PhD, between 150 to 200 students a year. But most of us just sit at home. Meanwhile, we say we have discovered oil. They have collaborations with GMPC. They come in and then train us. What is the essence of local content to the human resource development we have in this country if we keep talking about it every now and then, but we are not seeing the effect, the overall effect on us, students, as we are being trained to occupy these positions? We still go in for foreigners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want to hear more from, yes, please. The microphone, just press it, mention your name and where you're calling from, and let's speak to this, because financing local content it's a fantastic presentation. Don't get me wrong, right? And from all that he said, it appears it's going to cost us a lot of money. All the big things, the fund, etc., the banks, etc. It's going to cost us a lot of money. So assuming we can get all the money to finance local content, and then we finance, and we take that one aspect of it, human resource capacity, and we do it. We send our children abroad to go and learn, and they come and they can't find jobs, and the whites are still, foreigners are still getting the jobs. What's the point of that? Like, I want to hear. Maybe we're exaggerating, but I want to hear from you.
My name is Jamal.
Yes, from?
And I'm from Kumasi Technical University.
Yes.
Chemical engineering, BTech. Well, I'm starting from where we are talking about the capacity development.
Yeah.
I've been lamenting about it since we started this thing, and I think we are not getting it, and it is not there actually, because looking at it, being in school, you go to school, you go to lectures, you've been lectured, and at the end of the day, you have to go to the industry to gain some experience or some knowledge to back what. Even getting attached to that industry become a problem. You go there, they reject you, you move up and down, before you realize you come back home, no industrial attachment for you. you've been up and down with I'm speaking as a chemical engineer, up and down with that sector. And number two, it's been 11 years since we discovered oil in Ghana. And chemical engineering in Kumasi Technical University started way back in the 90s. But looking at the trend and the things that we are doing there, I think we are still in that shadow of not thinking about the oil exploration. We are thinking about other aspects of engineering in our lives. We talk about over here we are not doing, as we said, we are doing deep sea and other exploration. You come there, you get to the mechanical lab, and instead of them practicalizing deep sea welding on whatever that we have to do over there, they are doing different things. So the actual expertise, we are not getting one. The capacity development is missing. We are not having it. And number two.
So if that's the case, where is all the money that we see in the budget line item about how? Where is that going?
I guess the politicians.
I mean, I'm just wondering, in the civil society group that has done a tracking of this, what all the capacity building millions and millions of dollars that we say we are putting in capacity building, developing local content, whatever. Where is that going then? Or maybe this is just an isolated case, and then the majority, is it what it is? If anybody has expertise in tracking value for money as far as local content investment is concerned, please share with us. Are we getting value for money with all the things that we are putting in? We say we want local content, but yes, sir. Yes. Yeah, no, there's a microphone right there. I'll come back to the students who are still here because I know they have a lot to say on this.
Thank you. I think our session on industrialization and local content, we made it quite clear that unless the country has a strategic long-term focus to transform its economy using these resources, either it's oil or mining or whatever, as a springboard to change the structure of the economy, unless government has that agenda, 20, 30, even 40 years, you cannot have this patchwork. You know, when we say capacity building, we're talking about, you know, normal academic training, no applied knowledge with industry, no link with industry. These are sort of, they're not going to get you far. What you need is a systematic approach where you have knowledge hubs, you have industrial zones devoted to both applied research and supply of skills to the industry. You have corporate-sponsored knowledge hubs as well. I mean, Chile is a country that we always use as an example for which African countries can borrow lessons from. Chile had these industry, private-public partnership hubs where they throw challenges in terms of technological innovation. You have to have a systematic policy as a government to move your country from A to B to C and so on. Otherwise, you do a patchwork, and the people who are trained, who are coming out, will just be desperate, just trying to get a foot in the industry. So these are things that needs to be done, and it takes a long-term strategic focus. Of course, we know what the issues are in terms of short-termism, linked with politics, but that's not going to get you anywhere. 30 years ago, Chile was just another developing country with a lot of copper. Well, we've seen it in Brazil, we've seen it in so many other, Malaysia is a classic example. We need to sit down and reflect and to decide that once and for all we will change the structure of our economy, train people for applied industry and so on. South Africa is doing not doing so badly. They've recently established a Mandela Precinct, which is devoted to research and development and industry. In fact, industry is willing to support if government has a strategy and a systematic policy in this direction. So it's that kind of
Dr. Busia, I have a question for you.
Yes.
In the presentation we just saw, the local content fund is going to be ready for accessing in 2019. From what you're suggesting, it appears we don't have that strategy yet, right? And so if the fund becomes operational next year,
exactly,
and people were going to access it without the strategy, what's going to happen then?
Yeah, well, then we will keep on doing this same sort of short-termism because we think of local content only in terms of procurement. We don't think of local content as an opportunity to industrialize and move away from. These are finite resources. 20, 30 years from now, we will not have this oil. So what do? Even the people you're training, it's risky because after a while, they will not have jobs. So you have to think long term and systematic enough so that even after oil or mining is, exploited, you can move them to other industries.
What you're saying is heartbreaking. I want to hear, can I hear an experience from Kenya or anywhere else? Well, I'll come to you shortly, Mr. Obeng. Can I hear an experience of Kenya or somewhere else?
I'm not dismissing short-term, financing programs and so on, but you don't end there. You don't, it's a starting point. Yeah. You don't end there. You use it as an opportunity, even as you're doing financing with the fund and so on, to get procurement going because it's a requirement, it's a legal requirement for the industry. But you're also planning, long term. Yeah. How do you transform the economy? The structural transformation aspect is what is important. It's not the current fulfillment of requirements and a few companies make money. Oftentimes mix the two. The short versus the long term. That's what I'm saying. We have to find a way to balance.
I see more hands there. Please, just get to your table, put on a mic, and mention your name. There's a microphone at every table. So, yes, go on.
Good afternoon. My name is Desire Dude, Consult.
Yeah.
We're always talking about capacity building. Yes. Last year, I stood there. I mentioned that there seems to be no integration between our industry players or the organizations in the industry and our institutions. At least this year, we have students with their lecturers here. Last year, you see students alone, no lecturer. Fortunately, unfortunately for me, today I'm a graduate of MBA Petroleum Accounting and Finance from UPSA. And down the line, applications to work in the industry, and there is no yet opportunity. Just a couple of weeks ago, GOGIC outlaid a 6-month internship program which I applied for, hoping I'll be picked to, gain some hands-on experience in this industry I've studied for 2 years. Now, we talk about sponsoring people to go out or study whatever, excuse me to say. But people who are already in the industry, who have about 2 years to go to pension or retirement, are pushed out there to go and learn things that the youth, that we are still building local content. The industry is for the youth, it's for the future is for the youth. You need to get them to come on board. But yet none of these people get the opportunity to go out there. If you don't have a father or a brother or uncle in there, you don't have the opportunity. And these are people who don't have any interest, to work even in the industry. But because they got someone there, or there's somebody at the front there to bring him or her in, he goes and comes back, goes to study petroleum policy, and he wants to work as an engineer or please, let's get to integrate our institutions with the industry. Evans, you facilitated a forum which I was in, and we were there when the lecturer who taught me actually mentioned that he does not know the basis on which the accreditation board gave my school the go-ahead to teach or to run such a program.
Yeah.
And I was heartbroken. Like if
yeah, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
They will put out a job requirement. And the job requirements is such that the local or the indigenous student cannot meet that requirement, then they end up picking someone in their own circles. Last year when Tullow Oil opened for reservoir engineering, when you look at the requirements for a reservoir modeler, there is no school in Ghana that teaches how to become a reservoir modeler with those kind of softwares they were asking for. There's no way you can learn that in Ghana here. So it's like they are playing a game. They know that, okay, you cannot meet this requirement, and at the end of the day, we'll pick our own, and then we will say, oh, they are not well developed. Thank you.
Just to add to that, I'll come to you, Sir Sean. Just to add to that, this is an illustration, an example from the mining extractors, the mining sector. The minister who was here to open the session, when he was the Land and Natural Resources Minister, one time famous stormed one of the mining firms had met Ghanaian contractors, and they were telling them how to bid for this big contract that was open. And all these Ghanaian, firms had gathered, expecting that after that session they were going to, bid for it. The minister got wind of it because apparently the week before that meeting, and this is a very reputable mining firm in Ghana, a global giant. The week before they met the Ghanaian contractors, the mining firm had already awarded a contract to a foreign company. Anybody remember this story? And they had met the guys, the Ghanaian firms, and just, trying to tick a box, that we've met them. As he said, this Ghanaian company will apply thinking, local content law says, but the guys have already awarded a contract. The minister had to storm the gathering, grab the microphone, and literally gave the mining firm a scolding down in front of the cameras, exposed them. That you guys last week awarded a contract to a foreign company, so why are you meeting these local firms, telling them stories about how they can apply for the contract? That is the reality that we live in. So all these fantastic things that we talk about, local content, the law is great. I mean, we are good at putting laws on sheets of paper, but we are not good at implementing them. And so I'm just wondering whether this conversation we are having will go anywhere when the people who implement these laws really know who is monitoring to check how these local content laws is being implemented, and is it really affecting lives? Or is it because we have to talk about it and create a fund and big things, but in terms of its real impact, value isn't there? I see a hand there. Yes, and I'll take you also, but I want to hear this because this is a non-Ghanaian experience. I want to hear that as well.
One thing that I just want to comment. I think Africa is more than 50 years older. After independence, I think our freedom fighters went to party, and instead understanding that the job was supposed to start then. And when the Europeans were living here in Africa, they went to do different jobs. They went to work back at their home. But here in Africa, we started partying for independence, and we forgot that we were supposed to start working even harder than when the Europeans were here. So what is happening today, and this we should be very frank, it's going to be even tougher for our kids. Our life today is tough. And when we were looking for jobs 10 years ago, it was even harder. I'll tell you, and I want to share, this is, I only speak on this because I want to share also an experience to the job seekers. Probably university degrees don't teach us much about the reality of life. It's just a basic. Once you have that degree, you are a geologist, you are computer science, it's just a basic. The learnings begin immediately after your graduations. The learnings begin after that. And I will tell you, what will give you a job is not your first degree, but your attitude and how you approach things. I will tell you, when I was looking for jobs, I gave myself a target to find a job. After writing 1,000 letters, I gave that target to myself, 1,000 letters, but the 900 letter will give me the job. 999 letter will give me a job. It happened that I was walking and marching to the offices where I think I was looking for a job, even in the army. And I went to the army, knocked at the door. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have an attitude of waiting to know someone. I went there. I wanted to see a guy who is a colonel. By that time, I went, played around with the guards, and I asked them to see the guy. And they asked me if I have an appointment. I said, no, I don't have an appointment, but I'm looking for a job. I came from UK. So I came back from school, and I'm looking for a job. And they looked at me and said, you came from UK and looking for a job in the army? Are you crazy? And I said, no, there's a lot of opportunities in the army. I think we can do much more better in our army. Because I was about to join the UK army, I said, no, I'm going to join the Tanzanian army. So they liked my story. They called the guy, the boss allowed me, and he was curious to find this guy from UK who was looking for a job in the army. When I went there, he stood up and saluted me. 28 years in the army, nobody ever come to my office and ask a job like the way you do. You are a soldier. And he held me the end and took me to HR. That's the kind of an attitude you believe in. After that, he empowered me. I went to every office to look for a job. But this was unfortunate or fortunately, I got a job before I finished even 10 letters. And I joined in the bank. So I went in the private sector. It's going to be tough. We have to toughen up and stop complaining, lamenting about it. I cannot get a job if I do not know, if I don't have my uncle. No, you have to stop that. We have to work so harder, even harder than our freedom fighters. Our life is going to be tough. Our population is going to triple. Can you imagine this? So we have to change our attitude and work so hard. All of these nice things that we put here, local content policy, it's a business of the government, but the people should apply those policies and work on them. And it's not going to be easy at all. If anybody ever lied to us, our uncles, our fathers lied to us and life is easy. No, it's not. It will never be easier, even tougher. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
We have 2 minutes, and then he has to wrap up in 3, and then 5 o'clock sharp, we'll be out of here.
I have 2 quick suggestions to make. The first one is I think
you have to do it in 60 seconds, by the way.
Okay, I think the first one we should continue to impress on our leaders to force the foreign industry to allow our local guys to be able to attach to them and then learn through their work. The second one, which is most important, is why don't we go on the bauxite arrangement? We should form a consortium, like the Joint Aluminium Consortium they formed to exploit our own resources. So then we can get our students involved. We can even amortize our heritage fund, get a cheaper fund for it outside there, and then develop our own industry, pay back the money, so we can use as a basis to train our own people.
Yeah.
And then also get money for the country. I think with time, after we paid the money off, and then we can decide to offload the government shares through the public offering, or even offload it to a private entity.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll take the lady, yes? Oh, no, you okay, good, yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Evans. I'm calling from Nairobi.
Yeah.
I just wanted to echo what I think Kojo was saying around the need for planning and making sure that we actually have concrete plans. And so these plans would include sort of the needs of the continent. So, for example, we know that Kenya and Tanzania are building a pipeline. Well, Tanzania and Uganda are building a pipeline, and Kenya are building a pipeline. Those pipelines will need, for example, welders. We know those countries don't have enough trained welders to do that, right? So I think that one of the problems is that we're not, a lot of the training is not focused on the needs. So you're getting a lot more chemical engineers, a lot more oil and gas, people going out to train, a lot of lawyers. We have the same thing in Kenya at the moment. We have a lot of oil and gas lawyers. Very few of them are actually gainfully employed. A lot of them have gone back to the law firms, are working on immigration, or in cases of the other one, they're working on divorces, after that training. So because there's not enough planning in terms of what are the needs and how do we ensure, for example, if you want a strong national oil company, for example, 10 years down the line, what do we need to get to that? And so that you can start getting people trained to do that, right? And to be honest, that's the challenge. What we are doing now is saying we have capacity gaps. And once you say you have capacity gaps, then World Bank says we'll give you 50 million to train people, right? And so we're taking on these loans and we're saying, okay, now we have 50 million, we're getting people, training for 2 weeks. You go to those trainings and you're seeing, from an oil and gas engineer to the secretary in the central bank. That's a level of skill, difference between those people. Those trainings are not useful, but we're spending so much money on it, right? And I think we just need to sort of start planning better in terms of what are the needs and how do we address those needs.
Fantastic. Ms. Obeng, please, you have 2 or 3 minutes to sort of, all that you've heard, you can respond to that and also give me your final thoughts. Do you have a microphone?
Okay, interesting comments. Let me start with this. First, maybe with what the comment that Kojo made. I very much agree with him. Let's bear in mind that the oil and gas industry in Ghana is quite small, very modest. We are currently producing just around 200,000 barrels per day. And with the known resources that are supposed to come on stream, we'll be very lucky to even hit 500,000 at the plateau level. And if we reach there, the plateau will be very short and we start declining. The industry, in any case, is adjustable resources. It will not last long. When you are developing capacity in the oil and gas sector, or we are financing local content development, the intention is not that that local content will solve all the country's problems. However, promoting local content in oil and gas sector should accompany with macro level trade and industry development, so that the sector could act as a catalyst for developing other sectors of the economy. When we train people in geology, engineering, geoscience, petrobusiness areas, the intention is not for the people to work only in oil and gas sector. These skills can be applied to other sectors of the economy. So when people that are going to be trained through some of these financing arrangements, including AOGC, the intention is not for them to work only in oil and gas sector. And I think when the Honorable Minister launched the AOGC program a year ago, he made it very clear that the people that they are going to train are going to be trained to work within the entire economy. So the local content is not panacea for all our problems. If local content should have a meaningful and sustainable impact on the economy, it should accompany with a broader trade and industry planning within the country to make sure that the resources and the capacity that is developed in the oil and gas sector could be used to enhance the development of other sectors of the economy. Now, the issue of graduate unemployment, is very pervasive in the whole economy. It's not only in oil and gas sector. I said earlier that the oil and gas sector itself is highly capital intensive in nature, and therefore few people can be directly employed in that area. I appreciate the disappointment among our young graduates and those who spoke about they coming from the university and not getting jobs. I want to just say that the Petroleum Commission, the Ministry of Energy, is actively implementing the local content policy. Maybe few disappointment may lead for some people to conclude that it's not being implemented, but I can tell you that the evidence suggests within the short space of time that Ghana started producing oil, in terms of localization, on average, they have achieved about 75% of localization in the sector, on average, a minimum. And the interesting thing is that in the even core technical area, that many countries take a long time to achieve localization. We are at over 60%. 60% of the staff are local, the core technical areas. I mean, just recently we have an OIM in the LPS Kwame Nkrumah,
OIM is the offshore installation manager, is the highest ranked person in the offshore facility. And those who are familiar with the offshore operations, OIM is a typical, he's not very much educated person. He can be even be city and girl person. But typically to achieve OIM status, you need to work for a period of 25 to 30 years at the minimum. We are able to accelerate the development of Ghanaian to assume an OIM status in the Kwame Nkrumah. We have now graders and standard graders who are Ghanaians. We are very top position on the RIG and the LPSO. I think that in terms of localization and supply development, I can give you the data supply development. You can even, I hope, you have some friends from Nigeria and others are here. Nigeria started producing oil as far back as the 1950s. You can find out from them, one of the first time they got an indigenous OIM in Nigeria for other jurisdiction. The country is not doing bad at all in terms of local content oil and gas sector. I heard somebody talking about reservoir modeler, that the requirements that they give, very few people can meet it. Yes, it could be that. The oil and gas industry is technology driven. Indeed, the petroleum industry and the IT industry that are always ahead of academia in terms of knowledge and technology. They develop the technology, academia follows. So if you look at the recent development in the engineering area, the rig operation, etc., is moving very fast. Now we have 6th generation rigs. People that were trained even a few years ago, they cannot even work on the 6th generation rigs. And every industry, every job have requirements. So if you apply for a job and they say these are requirements, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's meant to discriminate against you. What you rather need is to find a way to build capacity. You may be trained as a petroleum engineer or geoscience from the university, but in the oil and gas sector, if you come as a fresh graduate from the university as an engineer, you will need between 7 to 10 years, depending on how fast you are learning, to reach a period of autonomy that you can work as an engineer. So the fact that you have been trained as a reservoir engineer from Tech and other university, you cannot come out as a reservoir engineer in the oil and gas sector. You will need to work for home. You will start as about, learn the trade before you can reach that period of autonomy. And that's the reality, that's the fact of the industry. And you have to really face it. This is a global industry, it's not a Ghanaian industry. We cannot develop our oil and gas industry in isolation. Remember, if they engage people who are not qualified to work on the rig, apart from the safety concern, which may be fatal or can damage the entire installation, there are insurance implications that if you send an unqualified person to work there, accident happen, the insurance company may refuse to pay. So you must recognize the reality of the industry that you are facing. And that's why the government is committed to ensure that Ghanaians are trained, acquire requisite capacity. In that case, when they advertise for job, for your information, every job position now, per our guidelines, when they are doing interview, Petroleum Commission staff sits at the interview to make sure that they won't come back and tell us that they can get a qualified Ghanaian. The job requirement, job description, the qualification requirement, we also review it to ensure that they will not demand unrealistic qualification in a way to drive Ghanaians away. But we must also ensure that safety and quality and standards are maintained in the industry. We cannot let unqualified people to go and work on our installations. And in the case whereby there's no qualified Ghanaian and they bring an expatriate, you ask all the IOCs and service companies, they submit a succession plan accompanied by a training program and a budget indicating when they're going to train a Ghanaian to replace the experts. So all these experts that you see working on the oil and gas installation, you ask each one of them, they have a named Ghanaian successor who they are training to replace them when the time comes. But this is an industry that you cannot completely localized. Even in more advanced countries such as Norway and in United States, oil and gas industry, global industry, you still have some expatriates working there, and we must face that reality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. A big round of applause for Mr. Obeng, and to ourselves as well for sitting through the day. And in fact, this is how we draw the curtain on today's first day of the summit. In the next session tomorrow, we expect even more rigorous, fascinating conversations on issues relating to oil and gas governance. Again, a big round of applause for ourselves for a really successful day. Thank you all for coming today. I expect to see you tomorrow, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Those staying at this fantastic hotel, I really envy you. And I might come and patch for a few hours before I head home. But thank you very much for coming. I'll see you tomorrow for another day of great conversations.